I think that the real conversation that needs to happen that the American public is not ready to have and that they're being placated on with DOGE is, if you want to save money, there are two things that matter.
The U.S. government currently contains too much waste, fraud, and abuse. Move. Okay, then. Brett, move, and Stephen, move, and you have 3 minutes to have a conversation. Go.
So here, my issue with these things is they become a bit, I guess you would appreciate the word tautological. Too much of a bad thing, whatever the question is, the answer is almost always going to be yes. So for instance, does the United States have too much crime? Yes. Does every country have too much crime? Yet, like, who's ever going to be like, no, this is an appropriate level of crime? Mm-hmm. I think that there is certainly some waste, fraud, and abuse in the U.S. government. There's waste, fraud, abuse in the private sector. Just from the examples that I've seen, it seems like the United States, especially given its size, does an exceptional job in curbing a lot of the waste, fraud, and abuse, because you don't typically get these huge scandals where there are on the magnitude of hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in fraud or actual just like waste or abuse happening. So I think for the most part, I think the U.S. government does a decent job, but I think we should always continue to keep the U.S. government honest.
I think you're almost agreeing with me, and I'm not sure why you're not over here, because that would assume that any amount of waste, fraud, and abuse is not good. And so the premise is that we should always work towards something better. And so if there is any amount of waste, fraud, and abuse, which you agree is in the private sector, it's probably in other countries as well, then you're going to want to take steps to mitigate, reduce, eliminate that amount of waste, fraud, and abuse. So any amount that we have, we could always say is too much.
I would disagree, because I think that too much implies that there needs to be extraordinary actions taken, or at least an extraordinary action taken to curb it. I think that there's going to be some percentage level of waste, fraud, and abuse always, and there's going to be like an ordinary number that you just accept. So for instance, it would be possible to make it so that nobody ever sped, ever, in the United States if you hired 10,000 police officers to be on every single interstate. But the reality is the cost of that just wouldn't be worth it. So you accept that some people are going to break the law, but hopefully we catch most of them, and hopefully things work out for the most part okay. When we talk about whether or not there's too much waste, fraud, or abuse, the question is there so much that we need to start hiring and paying even more money and more bureaucracy to go through it? And I don't feel like that's been adequately demonstrated. So is there some level of waste, fraud, and abuse? Sure, but is it too much such that we need to start like exceptional hiring measures to counter it? I am not convinced of that yet.
I think your analogy to crime is a good one. In fact, talking about speed limits, would we need to necessarily hire 10,000 more police in order to keep the speed limit at such that no one would ever break the speed limit? What about thinking outside the box? Don't worry about police. Maybe you could have some sort of governor on all cars, and the car simply wasn't able to go above 100 miles per hour. The equivalent thereof could perhaps be done in an automated way in the US government, such that there's some sort of AI technology automatically monitoring every single expenditure that's ever going on and checking to see whether or not it counts as waste, fraud, and abuse by some metric.
Yeah, but I think that's what like auditors are for, because obviously we can make it so that the level is zero in any industry, but it's just how much money you're willing to spend to do it, and you might spend more money than you end up saving, which I think is the issue.
Okay, new claim. Elon Musk with DOGE should audit the federal government. Move. All right, guys, grab a board. Write down the best reason you have for standing there. Okay? Try to guess, what is his best reason for standing on that mat?
I would suggest that he distrusts Elon Musk and thinks that Elon Musk would be a terrible person in trying to find out what the federal government's up to.
Yes or no, is that correct?
No.
Okay. What is his reason for standing there?
Elon Musk is an outsider who has qualifications in business that would allow him to audit the federal government in a unique way that hasn't been done by the federal government.
Is that correct?
No.
Guess again.
There are already systems in place which allow for the federal government to be audited, and so Elon Musk would be superfluous, and it would cost money for Elon Musk to do this.
Is that correct?
Not really, no.
Okay. You guys are running out of guesses. Go ahead.
The more audits, the better.
No.
Okay. Okay.
The fewer audits, the better, because it's more expensive to audit.
No.
Okay. Last guess.
The president has the right to ask anybody he wants to audit?
No.
Okay.
Jesus.
I know, it's really hard. Okay, show him your reason.
Okay, I cheated a little, and I
okay.
wrote 2, but they're equally important to me, so I couldn't choose between.
Okay, show him.
So the first is no legal authority, and you were kind of close to the bottom one, but I said I just don't think he's qualified for it. That was kind of like the not a good person, but I couldn't tell that was like a moral thing or not. But yeah, yeah.
Okay, so not do you agree, but do you understand?
Yes.
Okay, show him yours, please.
Basically, my translation is sunlight's the best disinfectant. So
So read that directly, though.
it highlights for everyone what the government is doing.
Not do you agree, but do you understand?
I so disagree, but I understand.
Okay, what do you disagree about that? Have a conversation for 3 minutes.
Am I allowed to ask what you do for work or what your educational background is?
Yeah, my background is basically in science and philosophy, and I work as a technical advisor for an investor.
Okay, so I feel like one of the big confusions when it comes to Elon Musk, we have this confusion a lot in the United States right now with freedom of speech, is this like sunlight is the best disinfectant, to where if we just flood the zone with a million different things, somehow that gives people a better idea of what's going on. But I don't agree with that. I think that DOGE has tried to publish information to show the American people what's going on, but all of the information that DOGE has published so far was already available on like public servers and databases. Like we could have seen all of it. So I don't think that he's making anything new available. And I think unfortunately he hasn't provided any shred of evidence yet of any actual waste, fraud, and abuse, which is what he was supposed to be looking for. He's just found evidence of programs that Trump doesn't like. So things involving DEI or trans people or dancing or whatever. But I don't think that's waste, fraud, and abuse. And I don't think that's what he was originally supposed to be looking for.
Let's grant all of that. What I would say is that because of the profile of Elon Musk and because of his ownership of X, that a lot of people who previously wouldn't have bothered going to look for those things that you say are publicly available are now doing so. And so there's a whole new generation of people who look up to Elon Musk and who go to X for their information, who will now be able to see what the government is up to. And so for that reason, I think that the idea that sunlight is the best disinfectant is a good maxim to live by.
So I could agree with that, but then that gets into my second criticism. I didn't do the legal one, forget that. I just don't think Elon is qualified to do this, and I don't think he's qualified to talk about it, and I can't tell if he is a malicious actor when he publicizes some of the information, or if he's so clueless that he just has no business being near it. So for instance, we just recently, now we've been inundated with these claims about how there are over, I think, 29 million people who are over the age of like 120 who are receiving Social Security payments. So if you actually, first of all, this wasn't even a claim originally discovered by Elon, although he pretends it is. The Office of Inspector General for the Social Security Administration has already been writing the SSA about this problem. The problem, though, has to do with the SSA updating something called a DMF, the Death Master File. Basically, when somebody dies, they push updates to this file, and then other agencies or private companies can use that file, but there is no evidence that the SSA has been paying anybody that hasn't been listed. The DMF is not the file that they use for payments. So this has been a situation that the SSA has already been aware of, they've already addressed in the past. They're working on like updating the DMF, but now a whole bunch of Americans think 20, 30 million people who are dead are receiving SSA payments. So that would be an example of like something has been publicized with sunlight, and now people have a bad or incorrect idea about it, which I think is not good. I don't think many people will have a correct idea about it going forward.
Well, clearly it wasn't enough sunlight because not enough people knew about it. So again, I can grant your premise that it's already been published and out there, and maybe Elon Musk is taking credit for it.
I just want to say I'm going to extend the conversation by 3 minutes. Go.
Yeah, so I presume that Elon Musk might be taking credit for things that he shouldn't be taking credit for, but let's go to the question of whether or not he's qualified to do this. Now, I'm not sure what the qualifications are that...
Well, on the Social Security thing, do you think that if you have more knowledge of a thing, but that knowledge is incorrect, do you have more or less knowledge than you did before?
Well, of course, incorrect knowledge is not a good thing, and so we want to try and eliminate the amount of ignorance.
So if a lot of people are now thinking because of him that 20 or 30 million old dead people are getting SSA payments, wouldn't that just be less knowledge because now people have an incorrect understanding about a thing?
Less knowledge, more ignorance, something incorrect. But I have a stance that people are error correctors, and so there will be systems and institutions in place which, let's grant, again, I'm not fully across the situation that you're talking about, but let's say that's all misinformation, that's all a load of garbage. Well then, the fact that it's out there in the public arena gives other outlets a chance and other people a chance to say, hey, look at this silliness that Musk is carrying on with. We already have refuted this before.
Can I ask you a boring epistemic question related to this? Why would you assume that a group of people, given some information, would be truth-seeking? Why would you assume that to be the case?
because I think that people ultimately want to improve the position that they're in. So it depends upon what their motivation is, of course. There might be this nefarious group of people that want to pull the wool over people's eyes and spread ignorance and misinformation, but I think that's the rare exception to the rule. I think more often than not, people really do want to improve their understanding of the world, and given they want to improve their understanding of the world, they're going to try and locate places where there has been misinformation, disinformation. We're not all perfect at it, but I think overall the rule is we want to
We don't have to
improve.
get super huge into it, but what you said was very interesting. A lot of people have this like, I'll say deontological, they have this like view that truth in and of itself is good, but I feel like the view that you gave me, you said as much, and I actually agree that it's more of an instrumental, like consequence-oriented thing to where truth is good insofar as we can improve our positions. But I think that opens us up to a world where there might be some things that we can learn that aren't true, but they improve our position. So for instance, if I had a view, say, I'll do one for the left. Let's say that I think that trans people are real and great and amazing, and even for kids, and let's say that somebody starts telling me, oh, there are 400 trans dance recitals and all these kids are having sex reassignment surgery and it's good. Learning that fact, that would improve my position. I would feel good, and I would even tell it to friends, but there's nothing to say that that's actually true. It just makes me feel good, so I would have no desire to error correct there. I think it's an issue that people don't like to confront.
You don't want to be deluded, but as well, this can get very deep into the weeds of epistemology. But for example, my go-to example on this is something like Newton's law of gravity. Newton's law of gravity is known to be false. However, it's very useful to learn it because it'll still get you some way towards a useful solution to your problem. And so if you want to get a rocket up to the moon, you only need to use this technically false law of gravity in order to do so. So there's a whole lot of things like that.
I agree with you there. Just one more thing. This is actually such an important conversation, but I agree with you there. The only issue I think is that when it comes to government policy, so many of these things will never actually come into contact with that you can think delusional things about them, such as like, what is the SSA budget? Like if I were to tell you yesterday $100 billion was wasted on Social Security, as an American, you'd have no idea. Or if 100 million illegal immigrants came in, or if we deported all of them, unless you knew one personally, you wouldn't really know. So I think that that's an issue in that we don't always connect what we see online to the actual like real life like thing of like what like the fact of the matter. I guess.
Presumably, if I was really interested, I could go and check it and I could dig down deep on it. But I grant that most people won't.
Okay. DOGE is doing a great job so far. Move. Okay, I'll give you 3 minutes. Go.
I mean, it'll be the thing I said before. Like DOGE hasn't discovered anything like worthwhile. They've publicized stuff that was already public, and Elon has just made an unfathomable amount of false claims. I would argue, and it's being argued, that there are plenty of laws that are being broken right now insofar as the legal authority of DOGE to even do what they're doing. There are temporary restraining orders that are being issued against the federal government and Trump's administration. It just seems to be an absolute catastrophe so far, unless your goal is to just take an axe to the entire federal government, I guess.
People are talking about government efficiency now. This is a wonderful thing. I think that most people who are otherwise politically inert and not really interested in the discussions about where their tax money goes are nonetheless now being involved in, well, look at this, a certain amount of money is being given to, I don't know, trans dancers in Cuba or something or other. I've only heard some of these weird and wacky stories about how US aid has been used. Now, I think that is only a good thing. And even if the amount of money that DOGE actually ends up saving is minuscule in comparison to the entire US budget, it does get people into a mindset of thinking more critically about how federal government funds are being spent.
I totally disagree. I feel like the big issue that I have is instead of getting people's minds in a critical area that it needs to be, we're wasting oxygen talking about the trans dance recitals. I think that the real conversation that needs to happen that the American public is not ready to have and that they're being placated on with DOGE is if you want to save money, there are two things that matter. I think Elon and Trump said like competency and something else. That was stupid. I don't know why he said that.
Competency and caring.
That was a stupid answer. The only two things that matter are your income and your outlays. So you either need to increase your income, meaning the federal government needs to expand its tax base or increase taxes. Donald Trump wants to decrease taxes, or you have to decrease your spending. Now, 70% of our budget is on are things like Social Security and Medicare. This is our non-discretionary spending. They don't want to touch that because they know that it's politically unpopular. So you have people like Elon Musk saying, I'm going to save $2 trillion through waste, fraud, and abuse. Our entire discretionary budget is $1.7 trillion. You can't say that's an insane claim. And even if you manage to cut all of our spending, we would still have a $2 trillion deficit. So I think there are good conversations that Americans can have about reducing the deficit and saving money, but we're not having any of that. We're talking about $50,000 being spent on trans dance recitals, and that's not getting us any closer to actually helping any of our deficit problems.
It doesn't, but it raises into consciousness from the American taxpayer what the purpose of government is. If they can all agree that it's not for trans dance recitals, then you can have a conversation about, well, what is the purpose of federal taxation? What is the purpose of any of these government departments? Do we need a Department of Education, for example, at the federal level? And if those conversations begin to happen that haven't happened before because people just think, well, it's opaque to me what the federal government is and what it does and what the tax money is spent on.
We've had these conversations for years. Like, should we have, like, Bush expanded the Department of Education when your child left behind. Like, we've been talking about, I feel like we've been talking about all of this. Now we're just having really dumb conversations about it, I feel.
We're out of time. DOGE is breaking the law. Move. Nope, Brett, you're on the inside.
Oh.
Okay, come up to the line. Okay, 4 minutes to have a conversation among yourselves.
I think the wonderful thing about the US system is that you have a Supreme Court, you have a justice system who will decide if and when a law has been broken. Trying to assume that you yourself are the expert in what has happened, whether you agree that they've broken the law or haven't broken the law, I think it's too early to say, and that's the job for the Supreme Court.
Right, well, that's why I strongly disagree that they've broken any laws, because we have laws in place that will determine that. And the left is always taking everything to the court system, and the judges ruled they're not doing anything against the law, so let's move forward. So, the left will constantly, I admire Destiny for having so much information, to be able to retain so much history. But for him to argue with me, for example, he'll always throw 1,000,001 reasons as to why his beliefs are substantiated. But the fact of the matter is that you can look at history to learn from it, to know what you shouldn't do, but none of us have a crystal ball. It's impossible to know what will and what won't happen. So we have to keep an open mind as to moving forward. The left should be more agreeable. I believe that we're strongly finally going to come to a point where the left is going to drop out, and they might finally start agreeing with, let's agree to disagree. Let's talk about the solutions.
Is DOGE breaking the law?
I don't believe they are. So far, they've tried this in the court system. The judge said, no, they're not breaking the law. So why is we continue to have problems and disagreements? And let's take it to the law. Why don't we allow DOGE to do their job? Let's look at legally. I don't think Trump or Elon Musk, look at what Elon Musk has done. I mean, the man is a genius.
Let's give him an opportunity.
So I think people have a fundamental misunderstanding of what checks and balances mean in the United States, and I think people are looking for the judicial system to check the executive. If the executive has decided we're just going to break every law and then see what the judiciary says. The judiciary is not there to pump the brakes on bad actions. There are exceptional court orders that can do this, like a temporary restraining order or a preliminary injunction or some sort of stay. But generally, you don't want somebody just saying, I'm going to break every single law, and then we'll see what the courts say afterwards, because the court is there to hold you accountable at the end. You punish people for breaking laws. I think that there have already been temporary restraining orders that have been issued against this administration, which is exceptional. That means that the judge has said before a case has even begun, this is looking really bad on the government side. So I think that the idea that DOGE can just take an axe and just start running through all these agencies, and we'll see what the courts say afterwards, plays right into the strategy of a corrupt executive. And I don't think they'd want it on the other side. If a Democrat came in and they're like, we're going to make this okay and this, and the courts are like trying to keep up with all the illegal Democratic actions, and I wouldn't want that either. I don't think we should.
That sounds like you're saying that you don't like what DOGE is doing. They're taking an axe to these departments. But what law is or has been broken so far?
So in the Constitution, Congress is the one that's authorized to create departments in the executive branch. When Congress is authorized to create those departments, they also declare how those offices work. So for instance, for USAID, there is a law from Congress that established the separation of that from the State Department. The President of the United States is not allowed to eliminate USAID. That would be illegal. Only Congress can authorize the elimination or the reorganization of that department. That would be breaking the law.
That's similar to the argument that I've heard about the Department of Education, that he doesn't have the power, for example, to eliminate the Department of Education. However, he does have the power to break up the Department of Education in various ways.
No. There might be some that he has the ability to shuffle things around, but these offices are created by Congress, and how he's allowed to function with these offices comes from what Congress dictates. He can't just arbitrarily cut up and remove and separate and reorganize and reshuffle these different departments. He has to follow Congress there. It's part of the Constitution in the United States.
Right, so here we go with these claims, right? Because they're claims until they become factual. and then the facts never transpire the way the left has been showing us. That's why you're losing society. The left is losing people like me because
We're out of time, but I'll let you finish.
we keep hearing these excuses and things that they're doing, and then what happens finally? Nothing.
Okay.
So the proof is in the pudding.
Okay, so everybody stay exactly where they are. I'm going to read another claim. Let's assume that that DOGE saves money. I understand that's a big assumption, but let's just assume that that's the case. DOGE should send out a DOGE dividend check. Move.
Do we stay in or can we go outer?
Yeah, you stay in, or if you're in, stay in. Oh, would you mind holding the mic? All right, I'm gonna give you the call in the air.
Heads.
It is tails. So you have a choice.
Yeah.
You can force him to steelman it, or you can steelman the claim DOGE should send out dividend checks.
I'll steal man and practice my.
Thank you.
Okay.
Don't make me stillman this administration.
If DOGE is able to recoup any money whatsoever through its finding of efficiency, then it's found money that has been misspent that originally belonged to the US taxpayer. So of course they should be the ones who are the beneficiaries of it directly.
You're in a very unenviable position. If I go to the store, this sounds like I was going to buy something for $100, but then I found out that it's marked off $50. So I buy it for $50 and I pretend that I've just gained $50 because I got it like marked off. Like the reality is if there's a huge budget deficit and they manage to trim the deficit, we still have a deficit. So spending more money to give money back when we still have the deficit, what's the point?
If I'm a US taxpayer struggling to pay my bills and you are the politician who has run this country into debt and you've got this huge deficit, that's not on me. I'm happy to take my check that I deserve to have because you've misspent my money, and that small amount, that tiny amount is going to be able to help me pay my electricity and help put my kids through school.
Sure, but then I feel like we're right back where we started, where the government's just giving money to people, and that's like totally contrary to the idea of what DOGE was, I guess, in the first place.
The government isn't giving, the government has no money. The government is taking money from the citizens, and because it's taking money from the citizens, that is the citizens' money. And so if they've misspent the money and the money has been saved, let's hand it back straight to them.
Yeah, but I guess when you say handed back, we're talking about every dollar that's handed back is going to be money that's borrowed from the Treasury. Like the government is still incurring more debt to give money back to people. Like if we have a budget deficit, that means that we have a shortfall. We'll say it's $2 trillion. Let's say they cut the budget deficit all the way down to $1 trillion, and we decide to print checks for $500 billion. That's still $500 billion the government has to borrow and then give back to the people. And I think it would be incredibly ironic for an administration that ran on cutting the deficit and cutting inflation to now just giving money to people because because they want to.
I don't think there's anything in the claim that says we can't do both, that we don't have to give back all of the money in terms of tax checks, tax credits, or whatever you want to call it. We can both eliminate part of the deficit and grant some of the citizens that have had their taxpayer money misused a little bit of a reward.
I think even if we wanted to grant that, maybe if they were to recover money, but it's really the fact that they're just canceling contracts going forward. It's not like they've gotten any money back. They're just canceling future expenditures. So again, it's just basically, we're just talking like free stimulus checks.
So I'm going to throw something in here. A max 20% was suggested. I think James Fishback, who was supposed to be here today, suggested that, but he was summoned by President Trump. A max 20% was suggested.
20% of what? Of all the money they save?
Yes.
It's just, I mean, like it's just fundamentally, it's just contrary to the whole position of the Republican cut the deficit and get rid of entitlement spending to just start printing checks and giving that to people. I feel like, how are we going to determine how that's done? Is it going to be done proportionally? So, for instance, if I pay more in taxes than somebody earning $36,000 a year, are they getting a check back? Because if so, it's just stimulus, basically, right? Like they didn't even pay in that money to be getting it back, right?
It's effectively a tax cut, but by a different name, a tax credit.